Welcome, everybody, to an all-new episode of Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano. Thank you so much for joining me as I take my weekly look at everything going on in the world of combat sports. There is a huge card in action. We're going to start off the show by previewing that in just a little bit. UFC 322 at the Garden, Madison Square Garden in New York City. UFC is in action with a stacked card, probably their best all year. You know, I'm saying it. A lot of people are agreeing. I've heard around different shows, different internet chatter. Everybody is impressed with how awesome this card is. And it's definitely a big departure from what we've seen the last couple of weeks. We're going to break down a lot of fights on that coming up next. Later on, we're also going to give a recap of what happened at UFC Fight Night, Bonfim versus Brown. Less controversy than before. Maybe a little bit, but not really. We'll get into that as well. We'll also talk about what's going to come up this weekend. BKFC 84 out there in Cali, out in the desert. Title on the line. We're going to get into that card as well with a couple fights. I'm also going to talk about being very upset about a certain streamer increasing their prices for next year because of some combat sports action. And guess what? Not the one you're thinking of. And I'm also going to talk about some rules going on out of Vegas involving MMA that's just baffling. Things that we've heard coming out of that commission. All that coming up. Make sure you follow me and the show on social media. Of course, I am On Air Mafia on just about everything, but on X, you can follow the show at Fighting Lines, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and now TikTok. That's right. I broke down. We are at Fighting Lines Pod, so make sure you're all over our social medias. Throughout the week, I will give you different clips of the show, little short teasers, little things to digest from the show that you love and are part of each week. So make sure you are involved with us on social media. Make sure you're liking, subscribing, and commenting on all the platforms where you enjoy this show. I appreciate it. Let's get right into things and start our mega preview of UFC 322. All right, let's start off our mega preview of this stacked card this weekend, Madison Square Garden, New York City, the Big Apple, heart of it all. UFC 322 making their yearly jaunt to NYC. ESPN pay-per-view, one of the last ones before they are done in this contract. 10 o'clock Eastern, of course, is the start of the main card. But there are fights from top to bottom that you're going to want to watch, names that you know throughout this card, ones that you've watched for years, some making their way back into the UFC and trying to get back into the action here, get back into winning ways, and maybe even eventually rankings, title shots, those kind of things. Some of them have a long way that we're going to talk about or touch on at least on the card. But, I mean, this is so loaded. And honestly, the promotion's been pretty weak. I mean, they are really not pumping this out as much as they should. I don't know if it's the fact that ESPN is coming to the end of their contract and they're saying, why are we going to put in the effort to really pump this up, to do the commercials and do all that when these guys are leaving us? I don't know if that's the case, but still, this card is loaded. You have multiple champions on this card, multiple belts involving title contenders from multiple divisions fighting each other. We got some super fights at the top of this card. Let's start off with the main event. The welterweight title between Della Maddalena versus Islam Makhachev. Now, JDM, of course, is the title holder, the 29-year-old from Australia, the welterweight champion. Lost his first 2 pro fights, then has won 18 fights over the last 9 years. It's incredible the run he has been on, including 8 wins in the UFC, coming off a decision win in May to win the belt over Belal Muhammad. Now, he's going to be defending it for the first time against Islam Makhachev, the former lightweight champ who had to give up that title to come up and try to fight this super fight. Of course, the UFC putting that in place recently, that it's no longer you can hold on to your title and go try to fight these super fights, maybe be a double champ, or maybe, you know, hold up these divisions and try to battle with 2 belts. No, now it's, you want to move up, you want to fight for a different title, you give up the one you have. It's one or none as far as the UFC is concerned. So Makhachev gave up that belt after he defended it 4 times to now try to fight for a new title, to try to fight for a new challenge here at welterweight. The guy hasn't lost in 10 years on a 15-fight win streak, coming off a Bravo choke win over Renato Moicano after Moicano came in on short notice in January to fight for that title. Now he moves up to fight the champion at welterweight. It's going to be all about who controls the action, who imposes their will on this fight. Makhachev, 13 of his 15 wins are by submission. He's mixed in some TKOs lately, but obviously a lot more on the ground submitting guys. JDM, 12 KO wins out of his 18 career wins. So does it stay on the feet and JDM have the advantage, or does Makhachev get it to the ground and smother his opponent to victory once again? For me, when you see the pictures of what Makhachev looks like, you know, sometimes these guys move up and they look undersized. Makhachev looks like a guy who's probably cutting a lot of weight to make 155 because He looks in great shape, looks jacked, looks like he feels perfect for this weight class. He's a big favorite, too. He's going against the champ, moving up a weight class, and still he's minus 290. So that just tells you what the books think. They think this guy is a beast. They think he's the better fighter. Obviously, that's not the way you want to bet it because you're not getting a lot back, laying a lot out to not make a lot back. I like Makhachev by KO, TKO, or submission, the double chance at plus 120. All you got to take away is that it doesn't go the distance in a 5-round fight for a guy who gets finishes. I love it. I'm getting plus money on that. That's a huge swing. Also, if you don't feel great going for just one side or the other, you can go under 3.5 at minus 104. I like that as well. I think he gets it in the third, maybe early fourth round. I don't think we get too deep into the fight. So those are the two favorite ways of playing it because obviously minus 290 is not the way you want to do it. Now, the books have it slanted to go over the rounds at minus 122, and they have points as a top way to finish at plus 115 for either guy, but they don't have it going the distance. They have that no at minus 160. So even though JDM has gone deep in fights the last few, Makhachev can either go deep in a fight or end it quickly. So if I'm liking Makhachev, I'm going to take the chance for the better money to think that it doesn't go too deep, that maybe we get into later into the fight, maybe the third, maybe even touch the championship rounds, but don't go too far in that distance and get those under 3.5 and him by KO, TKO, or submission. Both some of my favorite plays on this card. Then the other title fight on this card, which again involves two champions, is the women's flyweight title. Valentina Shevchenko, the Bullet, going against Zhang Weili. Now the Bullet Shevchenko is 37, of course, from Russia originally, lives in Vegas now. She's flyweight champion, has defended this belt 8 times in her title runs. Of course, lost it to Grasso in their trilogies there, lost it to her, then had the draw, then got it back in the third fight, defended it in May over Montefiore by decision. So she is still champion, taking on Zhang Weili, the 36-year-old from China, who was champion at 115, gave up that title to move up. Was strawweight champ, now back up into this weight class at 125 to fight for Shevchenko's flyweight title. 5-fight win streak for Weili coming in there, coming off a decision win over Tatiana Suarez back in February, defending her title. Of course, another fighter who had the belt, lost it, got it back. Now she's giving it up to get a new challenge and try to get this 125-pound title. For me, I'm going the Bullet, Shevchenko, minus 128. She is the slight favorite. Much closer, obviously, favorite here than it was in that first fight that we talked about. But Shevchenko only loses to the best of the best. Not that Weili isn't on that level, but her only losses have been to Amanda Nunes multiple times and that one fight against Grasso that we talked about where, to me, it just seemed like at that point in her career, she was bored. She was just beating everybody that wasn't the Lioness. Anytime she was in her division, it was just almost a coast to victory for her. So I think she maybe took it a little too easy, took it a little too for granted, and got caught. Didn't do that in the next couple fights and had much better fights and has looked much more herself since. Will it go the distance? The book says yes at minus 186. Over 4.5 rounds is minus 210. Ends by points is minus 195. Shevchenko does that a lot. In a lot of her fights, we're going the distance. So it's really hard to bet on any of those, though. Again, you got to lay some big juice in order to get that. Maybe you can do the 186 for yes, go the distance if you really want to. But if you want better money, which you don't even necessarily need it because minus 128 isn't long lines. So that is my favorite of this, is her just winning. But if you want a little bit better odds, if you want some plus money on this, you can go Shevchenko by points at plus 175. Again, my better play, my favorite play is her just winning straight up, minus 128. But if you want some plus money, plus 175, her by points is where you can look for that. Then at welterweight, you have number 2, Sean Brady versus number 8, Michael Morales. Brady, the 32-year-old from Philly, 18-1 in his MMA career, 8-1 in the UFC, on a 3-fight win streak right now for him, beating guys like Gastelum, Burns, and Leon Edwards. So a pretty stacked lineup there of guys he has beaten coming into this one. Most of his wins are by submission or decision. Morales, the 26-year-old from Ecuador, unbeaten in his MMA career, 18-0, 6-0 in the UFC, 13 of those wins by KO, TKO, including his last 2. So again, who is going to determine how this fight plays out? Is it the guy wanting the feet and wanting to trade and bang like Morales? Is it the guy wanting to get to the ground and try to choke you out in Brady? Hard to say. Both these guys, great fighters. For me, I'm going with Morales in this one, plus 116. It's going to be a tough fight. Both these guys are awesome fighters, as we said, going by their records, going with what they've done, the guys that they have beaten. And I know that Brady has been, a little bit better as far as the opponents he has beaten in his last couple fights. But what sticks out for me with Morales is that he is going to have a big reach advantage. And that is huge if you're a striker, because not only is it going to let him stay at distance and use the strikes he wants to try to finish his opponent, knock him out, get another KO, TKO victory, it's also going to help him give that extra time to keep Brady away from him as he fights off any takedown attempts. That is big when you got a guy that wants to grab your legs, grapple with you. Now, of course, if you throw some head kicks, things like that, that could unfortunately open you up to some of those takedowns. But if you throw some outside punches, throw some low kicks that make it harder to catch, that reach advantage could be a big difference in him keeping Brady out of his game plan, off of the mat, and letting him try to pick him apart from the outside and maybe get the TKO finish. I think it probably ends by a KO, TKO. Obviously, that's the way Morales wants to do it. That's the way he has done it. And if you look at Brady, he's only got one KO, TKO loss in his career, but it was to Belal Muhammad. No offense to Belal. Remember the name is one of my, favorite guys over the last decade to watch. I thought that he should have got a title shot a lot earlier than he did. I was upset that he lost the belt already, but that was the first time that Belal Muhammad got a KO, TKO victory in 9 years when he knocked out Brady. So obviously the chin can be touched. And against Morales, who's much more powerful, who's much more adept at striking, that could be a problem for Brady as well. Again at welterweight, because this is a big couple weeks for this division. We just talked about that last fight. This one as well is going to be a big factor in where things stand in these rankings and in title contention after it is done. And that is Leon Edwards, Carlos Prates. Edwards number 4 in the division. Prates number 9. Now Edwards, a 34-year-old, born in Jamaica, grew up in England and the UK, former welterweight champion, of course. He's on a 2-fight losing streak to Belal Muhammad and Sean Brady. He hasn't looked the same in the last couple fights. It sounded different as well. Only 34, so it's not like this guy's too long in the tooth, but just something seems different. I don't know if he's fully recaptured that for this fight going against Prates. 32-year-old from Brazil, 22-7 for his career in MMA, 17 of those wins coming by KO, TKO. But in the last 6 years, the guy is 12-1. So I had kind of a mixed bag of his career earlier. In the last 6 years, has really locked down, found his groove, and now has gone 5-1 in the UFC during that time as well. All those wins by KO, TKO. So another guy who's doing some great striking, an odd character coming out of that Fighting Nerds camp. The guy like smokes cigarettes left and right, but somehow is a top-level MMA fighter. Now, Brady's got his first loss in the UFC against Ian Machado Gary in April, but then came back with a KO win over Jeff Neal in August. So back on the right track here. I'm just not sure what we're getting from Edwards right now. We have not seen the same from him the last couple fights. Now, I've heard interviews where he sounds locked in. He sounds, how important this fight is. He knows that it is, a big thing for him to stay in this title mix to win this fight. If he doesn't, he could be falling down the mountain and ending up, maybe even outside that top 10 if things shake out certain ways. But I still don't know what we're going to get from him. And until I see that, I'm not betting on him. Prates, for his, side of things, wants Edwards. He called him out. He wanted this fight. And he's a favorite here at minus 210. Going to have a few inches of reach and a BJJ black belt. So even though the guy likes to strike, likes to get finishes, if it ends up on the ground, if Leon Edwards takes him down, he's going to be perfectly fine there on his back. So I only think Prates wins this fight at minus 210. Now, Edwards has never been knocked out, but Prates does get the finishes. So if you want better odds, you can look at Prates by KO, TKO, and we'll see what the odds are for that when they come out. Right now, we do not know, but all we know, the money line is minus 210, probably too rich. Maybe you can find it by KO, TKO, or maybe look at some of the over-unders. We'll try to reach out throughout the week later on when we see some of these odds and let you know what we think. To start off the main card, we have a lightweight battle between number 9, Neil Dariush, and number 3, Benoit Saint Denis. Now, Dariush, a 36-year-old, born in Iran, grew up in California. Saint Denis, the 29-year-old, born in France, lives in France, trains in France. Both these guys, very similar styles. They love to grind, love to get it on the ground, and they've struggled a bit over the last couple of years. Dariush lost back-to-back fights in 2023, then had a knee injury that kept him out for a while, didn't get the comeback fight he was supposed to get in January. He was supposed to fight Moicano, who got pulled up to that main event, that title fight, like we talked about. Moicano ended up getting the fight with him in the summer, though, which is where Dariush got back in the winning ways, fought him there, gets the decision win. Saint Denis lost back-to-back last year to Poirier and Moicano, but won back-to-back by submission in May and September this year. So both guys struggled over the last couple of years. Both guys coming off wins now. Where do they stand? Where are they fitting in this division? I'm not sure right now. Saint Denis, big favorite at minus 215. I don't feel confident enough in either of these guys to throw my money on to win. So I'm not going to pick that. Even though Saint Denis is a nice favorite there, I'm not feeling so great about him either. Who knows? Dariush can be coming on a heater out of nowhere since we barely saw him over the last couple of years. I like maybe the over rounds or to go the distance. Even though Saint Denis has only gone into decision once, I think these two guys, where they are right now in their careers, this could be one that it's a grind out win, struggle for both guys, and whoever has that little extra in the third round ends up taking it. So I'm looking for those when they come out as a over the rounds if it's a decent odds, or maybe to go the distance between Dariush and Saint Denis. So that does it for the main card, but you know what? We're not done yet, because like we said, this card is loaded, stacked, plenty of names to know, plenty of bets to get in there and get the action in. Now, I know the last couple cards we actually hit on the prelims a little bit, because you had those two female fights in both those cards that were actually the highest ranked fighters. And we'll talk about later on, we hit both of them, because we hit one with Norma Dumont 2 weeks ago. And then last week's card we hit as well with Cavalcanti. So we've had some sets and prelims. We haven't touched them as much, especially even in the bigger cards, because they haven't been that great in a lot of these fights. But I'm going to touch on a couple of these prelim fights right now, because not only are there some good fights, but there's some good bets to make in this one. Let's start off with that last fight at middleweight. Right before we get to the main card, the last prelim fight is going to be Bo Nickal versus Rodolfo Vieira. An interesting situation here, because Bo Nickal has never been on a prelim card before. Went right to the main card somehow. No one does that except this guy. Now maybe getting a little bit of reality check, because he was on the main card, and then recently the last couple weeks has gotten dropped down a little bit. So we'll see what he does with that and if that motivates him a little bit. But 29-year-old from Colorado, former Penn State wrestler, 7-1 in his MMA career, 4-1 in the UFC, all 4 of his wins by submission. Coming off a loss to RDR by TKO in May. So got his first loss, now getting his first prelim fight. Let's see how he comes out and responds to that against Vieira, the 36-year-old from Brazil, 11-3 in MMA for his career, 6-3 in the UFC, 9 of his career wins by submission, won 3 of his last 4 fights. So this is an interesting fight. We have a wrestler versus a grappler. A guy who can get submissions, who's going to be comfortable on his back. That could be something that some people are interested in some situations I might, because Nickal's minus 235. Vieira's getting some decent odds there to play. I want to pick him. I want to be on that train, because Nickal's gotten a lot of hype, and while he's done decently so far, I'm not putting him up there in the upper echelon of this division yet. So I would love to see him get a little bit of a reality check and get back-to-back losses, but you know what? I just don't see it that way. It seems like they are setting it up for him to get back in the winning ways here, because as good a grappler as Vieira is, if there's one way to neutralize a grappler, it's to throw a high-quality wrestler like Bo Nickal is. While he may not be the greatest MMA fighter just yet, still young in his career, the guy was a great wrestler and is a great wrestler. So you can lay and pray your way to victory if you really want, if you have that high-level skill as a wrestler against a grappler, as long as you don't put yourself in some dumb situations. So that's the way I'm thinking it goes. I think Nickal wins at a minus 235 again. Not the odds you want to play, so look for over rounds or to go to distance, because I think if the odds are okay on that one, that might be the way to play it. Even though it's only a 3-round fight, I think we're probably going all the way in this fight as Vieira tries to get the submission attempts and Nickal just stays on top and fights him off. Then for the 3rd week in a row, we get another great women's fight on the prelim card with some ranked fighters here. At women's flyweight, you have number 4, you have Erin Blanchfield versus number 8, Tracy Cortez. Cortez, a 31-year-old from Arizona, 12-2 in her MMA career, 6-1 in the UFC. Most of her wins by decision in the UFC. So she likes to go the distance in her fights, not finishing many opponents. Blanchfield, a 26-year-old from New York, New Jersey, from the tri-state area, going to have the hometown fans behind her. 13-2 in MMA, 6-1 in the UFC. Most of her wins by decision, with a couple from submission as well. So 2 fighters that are going to go deep in this fight for sure. This is actually a rematch, not in the UFC, but from 6.5 years ago when they fought in Invicta. Of course, Blanchfield much younger than Cortez was as well, of course, but Blanchfield still even earlier in her career than Cortez was. So Cortez got the split decision win. I think Blanchfield gets the revenge here. I think this being one of her only losses in her career, she's going to be motivated, she's going to be at home, and she's a much better fighter than she was in that fight 6.5 years ago, I'm sure. She's a big favorite again, minus 245. Best way to play it? Well, Blanchfield, last 3 fights and 5 of her last 7 fights have gone to decision. Cortez, all 8 of her fights in the UFC and 9 of her fights for her career have gone to decision. So you look for what the best odds are in fight to end by points or fight to go the distance. Now, if those ones have some crappy odds and aren't worth betting, of course, then you got to look to maximize your play and go with Blanchfield 5 points, because that's probably your best play. That's when you're most likely to get plus money on. If you can't get decent odds on the other ones, if it's another, minus 200, minus 330, like we've seen on some of these women fights over the last couple weeks, Blanchfield by points, probably your best bet for some good odds. We'll see what the odds are when they come out over the course of the week. All right, now there are some names on the early prelim cards as well, as I mentioned before. Don't worry, I'm not getting crazy enough to bet on those fights, because as we said, some of them have fallen on hard times. Some of them are even making their way back into the UFC from being out before. But just to point out some names you might know, some names you might want to check out earlier on the card if you have the time. If you're bored, if some of the college football games aren't that good. While Kyle Dawkins and Gerald Mearshart are fighting, so is Angela Hill, all the way on the second fight of the night. So a couple names that blast from the past, fighters who have been on main cards or even main events before, all the way down on the early prelim. So maybe some fights to still check out. Or if you're going to the fights, get in the building a little early so you can see these fighters in action. Now, before I get away from the UFC and get into some other things going on in combat sports, there was a card we had from last weekend. Another fight night for the UFC at the Apex. Now, I made it well known what I feel about those on last week's show, but there was some good action on this card. UFC Vegas 111 or UFC Fight Night Bonfim versus Brown, however you want to talk about it, however you want to name this fight card. That's going on at the Apex last Saturday. And it was headlined by a welterweight bout. Again, another one in this division over the last couple weeks and the next couple weeks that are going to be very important. Now, it's not going to exactly propel the winner into the title picture just yet, but Gabriel Bonfim, the number 14 in this division at the time of the fight, fighting Randy Brown. Bonfim for Brazil was 18-1, coming in on 3 wins in a row. Brown, the Jamaican fighter, was 20-6 in his career. Going to have a reach advantage, 5.5 inches coming into that fight, and was coming off a TKO win in April. I thought that Bonfim would eventually get the takedowns that he wanted, get it to the ground, get it to the mat, go for the submission. It's not how it played out. Now, he does get the win, though. Second round, KO. 1 minute and 40 seconds into the second round off a nasty knee with like a half clinch throw into it. A great victory for him. Slight bit of controversy, but not really. Some people want to see something in it. I didn't see it. We'll get into that right now. We had Bonfim to win the fight at minus 180. Now, we didn't have odds on the over, under on the rounds that we're looking at. I said if you get the over 1.5 and it was good odds, well, that ended up being minus 260, so not worth it. I also said maybe if you get the under 2.5, because I didn't think we were going deep in the fight, in the 5-round fight. I thought it was going to end earlier. And that 1.5 wouldn't have hit, so we're glad that the odds didn't work out for us because they got into the second round, but not deep enough. Now, the under 2.5, that was minus 110, and that was perfect because that hit being in that second round knockout. So you could have had some good money there as well if Bonfim at minus 180 was a little too rich for you. The fight, how it went down. First round, both guys were chopping at the legs early, trying to knock each other off, trying to slow each other down. And it seemed to work well for Bonfim especially. You could tell that Brown was getting bothered by those. The longer fighter, not able to move as well. You could see it swelling a little bit. So he did a good job there. Brown later used that reach advantage in the second half of the round, landed some good shots here or there. But I felt like the extra kicks by Bonfim throughout the early part of the round and the round overall probably got him at 10-9 to be slightly ahead going into that second round. Then in the second round, again, chopping at that leg. You can see every time Brown settled down on the leg, boom, leg kick to it. I thought Bonfim actually started to open up well with the hands as well. Started to land some good strikes on him, get that distance close a little bit better. And then just over 90 seconds into the round, Bonfim throws a great standing knee where he kind of throws the one hand over the top of the head as Brown is kind of ducking down a little bit to avoid a punch, pulls him down right into the right knee. Both guys end up going down because Brown got caught by the knee, knocked out. Bonfim was off balance from the knee and fell back. And that made it save Brown a little bit because Brown being completely knocked out, goes to the mat, gets woken up eventually by the mat by getting smacked down. But you can see his eyes were glazed over. The guy was out. The ref jumps in right away before Bonfim can lay more shots on him. And that's where the slight bit of controversy comes in. Some people thought maybe it was a little early because Brown starts to cover up as the fight is stopped. And if you just watch it quickly, yeah, maybe you can see that. If you're looking at just the hands coming up and like, oh, well, He wasn't unconscious. He could defend himself, should have went on. You know what? If you really watch that, watch the clip again. Watch it a couple times because the arms don't come up until the referee gets in the middle. And Bonfim is about half a second from landing a huge shot after getting up from falling to the mat himself and was ready to go and just lay into Brown while he was on the mat, unable to really defend himself. So I give credit to the referee. I thought he stopped it perfectly at that point because if he doesn't, there is going to be a bomb thrown on Brown that's going to put him right back out, probably concuss him, maybe do some damage, break something. So even though some people might have thought it might have been a little bit early, I don't think it was. I think it was a good stoppage. I think it was perfectly timed because if he does not get in the middle, Brown just starts to get those hands up, but they're not stopping anything coming from Bonfim at that point because he's still no idea where he is. Now, after the fight, Bonfim made a call out, had the chance to really push himself up and maybe fight somebody in the top 10, calls out Colby Covington, tells him to stop running, and says that he's going to retire him. Colby Covington has barely fought. Colby Covington is barely in the top 10. I get he is technically in front of him. I would have called out someone much different than that, someone more active, someone more in the mix at the title picture right now. But, we'll see because maybe because of where we stand right now in this division, maybe that's why I called out Covington. Maybe because the guy isn't involved with somebody else. Maybe because, obviously he's available because he hasn't fought in forever. Maybe he's saying, all right, I'll throw his name out there because, like we said, when you look at this division over the next 2 weeks, it seems like everybody in the top 10 is fighting somebody else in the top 10. So you have to pick somebody out. I guess go pick the inactive guy because you don't know what's going to shake out over the next 2 weeks. Either way, a great win by him. Maybe he gets up close to that top 10, if not just in it yet. And with the next fight, can maybe put himself in that title picture as, maybe 1-2 fights away. Great win for Bonfim there. Another fight we gave you picks for on this card was, of course, in the prelims, as I mentioned. The women's bantamweight fight, number 10, Mayra Bueno Silva versus number 11, Jacqueline Cavalcanti. This fight was between the Brazilian Silva, where most of her wins by submission. Her lost her last 3. Cavalcanti from Spain, most of her wins by decision or TKO. Was on a 4-fight win streak. All those by decision, though. So it seemed like we were going deep, and it seemed like it was going Cavalcanti's way. It seemed like the obvious picks. So that's what we gave you. Cavalcanti, minus 280. We get a win on that. Now, to go the distance was minus 330 when it came out. Over 2.5 rounds was minus 380. So not something you want to put the money on, not worth it. So we said, if those are too bad, go with Cavalcanti by decision. Minus 175, still a little bit of rich. So maybe nobody touched it. Maybe people just stayed off it. But we threw that out there. I gave you that one in case it was available, in case it was worth it. Obviously, it was better than just playing the money line straight. But she does get the win. She wins it by unanimous decision. And this was pretty much her fight throughout. In the first round, Bueno Silva was coming forward, but Cavalcanti was picking her apart throughout much of that round. There was a late takedown tried by Bueno Silva. Doesn't get it. 10-9 Cavalcanti. Cavalcanti switches it up in round 2, and she's the one coming forward. She's landing a good combo 1 minute in. She gets Bueno Silva against the cage midway through the fight. She's opening up on her a little bit. 10-9 for her again to be up 20-18. Now, Bueno Silva, obviously knowing she's down, comes forward, tries to be the aggressor again in the third, but just can't do it. Doesn't land it. Look at the numbers. Cavalcanti just outlanded her in every round, picked her apart from the outside, was much better on the feet, and Bueno Silva just never was able to get it to the mat. So Cavalcanti wins it easily. All 3 judges give her the fight, and she moves on now and moves up into those rankings a little bit, getting herself into that top 10 probably. Now, the co-main on this fight, we didn't give a pick for it, was Matt Schnell versus Joseph Morales at Flyweight. Now, this was one of those interesting fights where both guys like to grapple but don't have great takedown defense. Schnell landed more significant strikes but also took more, so we didn't know how it was going to go. I didn't know if it was going to be 2 guys fighting and seeing who was better on the ground. I didn't know if it was going to be 2 guys that like to grapple saying, well, we both like the mat, so let's stand and trade and see who's better on the feet. The way it goes is that we end up seeing some ground action here. Morales gets the guillotine choke 2 minutes and 54 seconds into the first round for the victory. Morales was throwing some good strikes on the feet early on. In that first minute, he was landing some good punches, and maybe that's why Schnell wrapped him up and tried to throw him to the mat. Problem is, that doesn't go his way either because Morales immediately rolls, ends up in top position, gets side control, then later on attempts a Kimura, and then goes from the Kimura to a crucifix behind Schnell, holding both arms. Now, Schnell tried to counter this eventually. He's comfortable, didn't panic, didn't freak out. But in order to get out of that position, he tried to roll into his opponent Morales. And what that did was open him up to the guillotine choke that Morales slaps on him immediately, locks it in, and it's in deep quick because Chanel taps pretty quickly. For a guy who's very comfortable on the ground, he knew that he was done pretty quickly, did not try to fight out of that guillotine because he had no chance. And Morales gets the win. He looked great on the ground. As I said, going from, rolling after the takedown to getting the side control, trying one submission with the Kimura, switching into the crucifix, getting the other submission. Like, he just looked great on the mat. And now he gets back-to-back wins in the UFC, both of those by submission. And he called for the UFC to come to Sacramento. Of course, he's part of Team Alpha Male. Uriah Faber was in his corner there. And he's calling, like, come back, come fight in our part of California, wanting a card there that he could be part of. We'll see if the UFC does. It's been a long time since they've been to Sacktown, but we'll see if Morales gets that wish. But right now, he gets the victory and, furthers his career here in the UFC. Also on the main card for that fight night, you had Rules Medic get a first-round KO TKO win over Salikov. He caught him with a straight left that dropped him and just jumped right on him with a few big shots before the ref jumped in. That's 2 in a row and 3 of 4 for Medic right now in his division. You also had Chris Padilla fight Islam Bonfim, Bonfim's brother. After Bonfim missed weight by 5 pounds, Padilla still lets the fight go on. Gets the second-round win by ground and pound stoppage to get his 4th win in a row, all by stoppage. But it was a very weird situation afterwards because you get into the post-fight interview and he's pleading for a bonus from Dana White, saying he needs to take care of his family, saying he really needs his money, got to take care of his mama, and he doesn't get it. So not only is it a bad look for the UFC a week after we had this gambling investigation start over a potentially thrown fight that you got a guy begging for money, because who are most susceptible to gamblers and guys trying to fix fights? These lower fight guys who are not getting paid enough. This guy's begging you for money, telling you how hard up he is after he wins a fight. Not a good look. It's even worse look that afterwards he doesn't even get the bonus. So he asked for it, doesn't get it, and now he's emotional in the post-fight press conference, talking to his brother before that, and how hard it is for him to try to provide for his family. So we've talked about it for weeks now, from back when we started the first episode of this show, talking about these guys not getting paid enough when we had this $1 billion deal from Paramount for each year, to talking last week about guys allegedly throwing fights and how if you're not going to pay them enough, where do you think they're going to get the money to survive? Coming into focus once again with Padilla, pretty much telling Dana, I'm barely hanging on here, help me out. Not a good look for the UFC there. Now, the UFC isn't the only one in action this week. You also have a card for the BKFC. BKFC 84, Dyer versus Hunt 2 out there in the desert in California. Going to start at 9 o'clock Eastern time on DAZN. So just before the UFC gets their main card going, the BKFC is going to get theirs underway. And hopefully, try to finish quick and not compete too much with the main card of the UFC. I might have put this one a little earlier in the day, made it kind of afternoon delight out there in California and sit back and not compete. But either way, it is going to happen. Light heavyweight title on the line for this one with Josh D-Day Dyer versus the juggernaut Lorenzo Hunt. Now, this was originally at BKFC 82 announced as Mundell, the redneck, versus Josh Dyer, with Mundell moving up to fight for this title, trying to be a 2-division champion. Then we get a switch out of nowhere and the return of the juggernaut. Not sure why. Hopefully that's because they're making Mundell Perry, but we will see. Now Hunt, the 43-year-old from Florida, the former light heavyweight and cruiserweight champion, 11-2 in the BKFC. Now this is his first fight since coming back after losing to Mick Terrell, trying to be a 3-division champion and fight for heavyweight last April. Of course, he had the injury there, the busted arm that he had to get fixed up, then had an alleged suspension, come down after that fight as well. Was supposed to come back and fight Chris Camozzi in Italy earlier this year, try to reclaim his title at cruiserweight. That one got pulled out of nowhere for unknown reasons, undisclosed reasons. So now he is back, though, fighting here against Dyer. D-Day Dyer, the 34-year-old from South Dakota, is the current light heavyweight champion, 5-1 in his BKFC career, coming off a win over Mike Richmond that got him this title by 4th round TKO in May. So defending it for the first time, and now he does it against the former champion. Now, Hunt beat Dyer the first time these two fought in 2021 in a 5th round TKO. So these guys have fought each other before. It's been a long time. A lot has happened since. Going to be interesting to see if this is anything like the first fight. It's hard to pick against the Juggernaut with all he has done in the BKFC and how badass he has been in some of these divisions, but he's been gone for a while, and who knows what has been going on. He's gotten older. He got injured. There were other things going on, obviously, behind the scenes that we are not all privy to. I'm going to stick with Dyer here by 4th round TKO to hold on to this title, but that could very easily be wrong and have the Juggernaut catch him, early in the first 2 or 3 rounds and get the finish as well with that power. But, we did see Richmond rock the Juggernaut as well. So that chin is susceptible if it gets hit right. But this could be a great fight either way for these two against each other in the desert out in California. Then at middleweight, you have a battle between Dariush and Zeb Vincent. Wild Boy Stuve, the 28-year-old from Canada, 3-0 in the BKFC with 2 first-round TKO victories, 1 in the second round. So he has gotten finishes in all 3 fights. This is his first fight in the U.S. Had his first 3 fights for the BKFC up there in Canada. Now he's coming down south over the border and fighting the CWB. Zeb Vincent, the 30-year-old from Missouri, who's 3-2 in the BKFC. Win or lose, this guy is going to end up in a finish because that's how his fights go. Either it's he finishes you or you finish him. Coming off a first-round TKO versus Ramirez in April. Now this fight's going to be all about who controls the pace and the action of this fight. I think CWB Vincent is a little bit more measured, likes to pick apart his opponent, likes to wait and find his opportunities and the best ways to get his strikes in there. While Wild Boy Stuve wants to come in there swinging and finish this fight as quick as possible. So if it ends early, it's going to be for Stuve. If it's going to end later in the fight, in the 3rd, 4th, maybe in 5th round, that's Zeb Vincent territory. I'm going with Stuve getting the second round TKO, though, because both of Zeb Vincent's losses have come against guys who are quick starters and have ended the fight quickly. So I'm going to go with the Canadian coming down and making some noise out there in Cali. We also have a women's featherweight fight of notice here between Aspen Ladd and Shayna Bintliff. That's right, Aspen Ladd, former UFC fighter, making her BKFC debut here, the 30-year-old from California. Going to have a lot of people there supporting her, I'm sure. Lost 3 of her last 4 fights in the UFC before going into the PFL, where she went 3-2 over the last few years. Now trying her hand at the BKFC, which can be a completely different beast. A good striker, but we'll see what it's like when those gloves come off and you get hit with bare knuckles. Not a lot of people can handle that. One person who has handled that is Bintliff so far, the 29-year-old from South Dakota. She took a 6-year layoff between her amateur MMA career and becoming a pro fighter and turning into the BKFC, where she had her first fight this past year at Sturgis over Rulis, where she got a 2nd round TKO victory. So doesn't have a ton of experience in the BKFC, but has enough, has that fight under her belt. That could be good for her against Ladd. Ladd has more experience overall in her fight career, but it could be different fighting in bare knuckle fighting for people who are not used to that. So we'll see how she adjusts in her first fight in the BKFC against Shayna Bintliff. Now, also on this fight card, you have a light heavyweight battle between Cody Vidal and David Simpson. Vidal, the 37-year-old from California, is 2-1-1 in his BKFC career, but that one loss was his very first fight in the BKFC, has either won or drawn since, coming off a 4th round TKO win over Horn in July. Going against Simpson, the 36-year-old from Kansas, 3-4 in the BKFC. This guy is exciting no matter what. Got some violent fights under his belt. He is never coming in there to look for points. He is looking to swing, and if it gets to the judge's hands, so be it, but he's not trying to get that way for sure. Coming off back-to-back first-minute TKOs in August and September, so has fought a bunch recently, now fighting again in early November. The guy is hot, he's violent, looking to get quick fights. So if he is in control, if he dictates the pace, then it's going to go his way early. If Vidal is able to survive the initial onslaught, then it's his fight to win later on in the fight. That's how we're going to look at that one. It's either quick for Simpson or late for Vidal. Who's going to push the pace and who's going to control the action is going to be the one who gets the victory. Last one on the main card, we're going to talk about welterweight battle between Evgeny Kurdanov and Paulo Games. Games, a 38-year-old from Brazil, is 1-1 in the BKFC, coming off a 3rd round TKO in September over Reed. Kurdanov, the 31-year-old Russian who lives in Cali and has for a long time, trains out there. He's 1-2 in the BKFC. He lost to Slavetsky in 22, then lost to Lane in 2024. Just beat Elvin Brito in January, so finally getting on the right side of things here with a unanimous decision win. Can he get back to 500 here? Can Games get over 500? This is a big, important fight for both these guys in their BKFC career. It can determine if either of them are let go or if they're getting in the mix here and getting back into the winning ways. Neither of them have flashy records, so it could be a very important fight for their BKFC careers here. As I said at the start of the show, I got to talk about one of these streaming services changing their prices involving combat sports, and it's just ridiculous. And as you can see over my shoulder, probably not the one you were thinking of. Now, Paramount Plus did talk about a price increase. We're going to talk about that in just a minute, involving the UFC, of course. But DAZN coming out this same week with their new Ultimate tier plan. Now, of course, you can still have the usual $20 a month for DAZN, $225 for the year in the US, in order to have just, the basic fights, and to have BKFC, to have their boxing that isn't pay-per-views, to have certain European soccer games as well, or highlights from other European soccer leagues. So all that you can keep at your $20 a month, $225 a year. But they introduced this new tier, the Ultimate tier, to go into effect next year, where you can pay $45 a month or $450 a year. Or if you're in the UK, $25 a month or $250 for the year. You could also get involved if you're a little earlier over in the UK. You can get it for $23 a month before December. But still, I don't know why the price difference between the US and UK, because when you work out the pounds versus dollars, it doesn't even equal out. It's still a lot more for the US than it is for over in the UK. Maybe the rights fees are a lot higher here for the US than they're paying over there, so they can be able to charge less. But either way, let's just talk about the US, because that's where I am. That's where probably a lot of people who are watching this are located. So $45 a month, $450 a year. What does that get you? Well, it gets you at least 12 pay-per-view fights a year, as well as the other boxing, BKFC, Serie A games in Spanish, as well as the La Liga, Bundesliga, and Saudi Arabia Soccer League highlights. And in the US, you also get select Champions League games and Europa League games. So all that stuff, besides the pay-per-views, you already get with that $20 subscription like I talked about. And if you're a soccer junkie, maybe that works for you. But I mean, yeah, you get Serie A, but it's Spanish. So if you're in the US, if you're not Spanish speaking, that kind of stinks. And you get highlights from the other ones. You can get highlights online easy. I don't know why you would pay for that. We're going to focus on just basically the pay-per-views, because that is the main difference. Now, they charge about $60 per pay-per-view for DAZN. So if I want all the pay-per-views, you're going to charge me $25 more a month and $225 more a year. More than double the per month and exactly double per year costs to have this Ultimate tier where I get the pay-per-views for free. Compare that to the Paramount Plus deal that they signed with the UFC and the price increase they just announced. Now, Paramount Plus is going to raise their prices in the first quarter of 2026 as well. And it goes from $13 a month and $120 a year to $14 a month and $130 a year, with no extra charge for pay-per-views, because there's no more pay-per-views now with the UFC and Paramount. So if you wait till January, February, whenever they bump up the prices, it's an extra $1 a month, as opposed to an extra $25 for DAZN. And that includes, of course, the NFL on CBS, UEFA Champions League, Showtime shows and movies, CBS shows, original shows and movies. You can download stuff, all stuff that you cannot get or do on DAZN. What the hell is DAZN doing? Why does boxing keep killing itself? Why do they keep doing stupid things to get in their own way? They are not the leader in combat sports anymore, as much as a lot of these promoters want you to believe that. Hell, they might not even be the leader in boxing right now if it comes down to it, the way that the UFC, the TKO group, and Turki Al-Sheikh have gotten into bed and started doing some of these fights. I mean, they had the best fight of the year so far of 2025. Now, things are going to change. TKO is not going to be the same with those huge fights every time. But still, they're not holding a monopoly on their own sport right now. And they're going to jack up prices. If you are a boxing diehard, maybe this is worth it, because they have 185 fights a year, they say, plus the 12 pay-per-views, at least 12 pay-per-views. So maybe then it's worth it. And if they're changing some of their fights that weren't on pay-per-view before to be pay-per-views, then maybe they're squeezing that money out of you more so than if you do this $45 a month. But for people who aren't diehards, who aren't watching every weekend, who are really kind of hanging around for the big fights because they don't want to watch some guy on the 7th, fight of a card that's not even a pay-per-view, like me, like probably most boxing fans right now. This is absolutely insane, and no one's going to do it. Because, yes, they have some good fights coming up over the next couple months. November 22nd, you have David Benavidez versus Anthony Yarde. January 30th, you have Miranda Serrano getting back in there on that fight in Puerto Rico, as well as Holly Holm getting back into boxing and fighting for a title. So 2 good cards that they have coming up over the next couple months. But let's look back at 2025. Let's look at where the best fights were for 2025. David Benavidez versus Morrell in February, prime pay-per-view. Bivol versus Beterbiev and Parker versus Bacoli, regular DAZN. Tank Davis, Lamont Roach, prime pay-per-view. Eubank Jr. versus Ben the first time and Yarde versus Arthur, regular DAZN. Now, the only 2 ones that fall in this DAZN pay-per-view area right now, Wally Romero, Ryan Garcia, and Devin Haney, Jose Ramirez, and Teofimo Lopez, Arnold Barbomas Jr. That was a DAZN pay-per-view, those 3 fights. And you also had Canelo Alvarez versus Skull on DAZN pay-per-view. But Alvarez is gone from DAZN. He's done with them. He's with Turkey Al-Sheikh. He's with TKO. He's with Netflix. So you're not having it on DAZN anymore anyway. So then you're down to 1 card that really would have mattered in 2026 for DAZN pay-per-view. Taylor Serrano 3, Netflix. Shakur Stevenson, William Zepeda, regular DAZN. Mario Barrios Pacquiao, regular Prime. Usyk Dubois, regular DAZN. Claressa Shields versus Daniels, regular DAZN. Canelo Crawford, Netflix. Wardley Parker, regular DAZN. So most of the best fights for this year were not on DAZN pay-per-view or on DAZN at all. A lot of them, all the PBC stuff is going to be on Prime or Prime pay-per-view. You have pay-per-view.com in the mix. You have Netflix with a lot of big events as well. So DAZN isn't even dominating its own sport in boxing. And they want you to pay $45 a month, almost $500 a year for it? That is insane. And wasn't DAZN supposed to kill the pay-per-view model? Wasn't that the whole point of them getting into this and doing the subscription service that was focused on boxing, was to get rid of pay-per-views? And instead of getting rid of them, they're charging you more to get the pay-per-views and to have a subscription tier that is about the pay-per-views? What are you doing? And not to mention, their promotion sucks. At least in the US, their promotion is absolutely terrible. Most times you don't even know the fights are happening unless you are really locked in and tuned in. Anybody know about Eubank Jr. Ben 2 for the most part this weekend? No. Only reason I know about it, I saw it on social media about how these guys hate each other and now there's hatred. Anybody know about Parker and Wardley before it happened? Most people didn't know that fight was happening until the controversy about the stoppage. So they barely promote their fights to get people to watch them. They barely have the biggest fights as it is, and they want to jack up the price by double in order for you to see all the pay-per-views? It's nuts, and it's going to hurt boxing more and more. Now, years ago, I was one of these guys that said, hey, if you give me every UFC pay-per-view for the year, like $500, I'll probably do it, because I'm not paying $800 to $1,000 for every pay-per-view they have. In boxing, I'm not doing that. Not every pay-per-view is worth it, and definitely not every DAZN fight is worth it. So I think they're drastically overplaying their hand here, and it's going to bite them in the ass and hurt boxing as a sport. Now, before I get out of here, just 2 news items I want to hit on, talk about involving the Nevada State Athletic Commission and the rules of MMA. First off, big talk, of course, about rules in MMA has been about eye pokes over the last couple weeks, starting with UFC 321, where you had the heavyweight title fight derailed by nasty double eye poke by Gane on Aspinall, people ripping on Aspinall. I mean, the guy can still not see right weeks later, so feel pretty stupid now, don't you? But besides that, Herb Dean talked last week about how they were going to have a meeting for the Nevada State Athletic Commission revolving around eye pokes. Now, he went on with Michael Bisping and Paul Felder on their podcast this past weekend and talk about that meeting, talk about the eye pokes and what the aftermath was after Gane Aspinall as far as Nevada goes. But, a lot of these commissions kind of go off one or the other, and Nevada is usually kind of a standard bearer for a lot of these commissions in combat sports. Now, he said there's going to be more meetings about it because there are a lot of ideas floated. They're, not completely locked in on certainly one thing just yet. But as of right now, what they're going to do about the eye pokes is enforce the rule more on the books about fingers being pointed forward being a foul. Now, apparently, already on the books is the rule that if the fingers are kind of pointed forward, not straight up, and there are an eye poke happens, it's a foul. Not accidental, not oops, warning, things like that. It's a foul, meaning intentional, meaning points deducted, meaning possible DQs, which could have factored into some of these other fights. Now he says that the fingers were pointed up and not necessarily out in that Aspinall-Gane fight, but I mean, that's just ridiculous. First of all, that we're going to differentiate which direction they're pointed means one thing or the other. The fingers are up, you poke them in the eye, it's a foul. It should be a foul, but it's more maddening to hear that there's already a rule on the books that they have been lenient in enforcing. I mean, if this has been a problem forever, why have we slow played enforcing the rule? If this is something that we've been seeing for the history of MMA, as long as we've had these fingerless gloves where these guys have been able to do that, and we've recently, or the last couple of years, however long it was, had this rule on the books where you get a foul, point taken, DQ if your fingers are pointed out, and the refs aren't doing that, then what was the point of the rule? You put a rule in place, you got to make sure you do it. You got to make sure you enforce it. So I'm glad to hear that they're finally going to do that, at least. They're going to actually enforce what they've already had in writing. But obviously, as Herb Dean said, there needs to be more involved with this. There needs to be more discussion. There needs to be more figuring this out, and they'll do that over, I think, several more meetings, as he put it. So I'm glad that they're working on this, but I find it ridiculous to hear that there was a rule on the books that would make this a worse penalty than what it has been, and they just haven't been following through on it. That's just ridiculous to me. Speaking of ridiculous rules, apparently Nevada State Athletic Commission has their own rules, and they don't necessarily follow the unified rules, as we found out this week, because Ante Della filed a formal complaint with the Athletic Commission Nevada over the restart of his fight against Waldo Cortez Acosta, because according to the unified rules, that was illegal. And according to the broadcast, that was illegal. Now, the executive director of the Nevada Commission, Jeff Mullen, said in a statement that the commission did follow its own rules and handled it properly because their rules on instant replay are different than unified rules. And if you want to break down in more depth about what the differences are, you can go check out, there's a great article, of course, on Uncrowned by Ben Folks about it, gets into it. Basically, from what he pointed out, the unified rules say that you can only use replay after a stoppage, after the fight is over. But according to the Nevada rules, you can use it at any point prior to an announcement of a winner. Although, if it's during a timeout, the fighters are supposed to go to neutral corners and not be coached at all. Obviously, it wasn't used as a timeout, first of all, in Nevada, in the Apex, because the eye poke happened, as we discussed last week. The ref looked like he was going to jump in, then backs off, lets him unload on him a little more, and then steps in and stops the fight. Now, he doesn't completely wave it off and get his arms going, but are we really getting to the semantics of the guy didn't put his arm over the head and raise like it's a fair catch in the NFL? He watched him unload another 12 punches on him before he stepped in. He didn't stop it right after the eye poke. He stepped in after the guy was beating him up for another 10 seconds. So obviously we all assume it wasn't about the eye poke, it was about the stoppage. And not only that, they let corners in there. They let them bring in the stools, and these guys were sitting down there. Now, Nevada does say, that part was screwed up, that they shouldn't let anybody in the cage. And they say it wasn't their fault. They didn't let them in, but you're supposed to be in charge of it. And that the doctor immediately, was ushering all those people out, but they were let in. And it did happen. And it was a stoppage of the fight when this guy was unloading on him, not when the eye poke happened. So by your definition, that's not a timeout to go check out the replay. That was a stoppage. But more importantly, when you find out that the unified rules say this, but the Nevada rules say this, wait, isn't the whole point of unified rules of MMA that everybody agrees to them, and this is what we are all going to follow? Why does Nevada have their own idea about it, have their own rule on it, have their own way of adjudicating it? Shouldn't it be a situation where we all get together, we agree on it, unified means we're all on the same page? Because are you expecting fighters to learn the different nuances of the rules for every jurisdiction they fight in? Every time they go for a next fight, it's not just study your opponent, what he wants to do, but study the rule book again and make sure you can pass a test on this so that in the middle of fight, You know exactly what's supposed to go on? That just seems ridiculous to me. The whole reason we have unified rules is so that we are all on the same page and going by the same fight rules. Why is Nevada altering it a little bit, ever so slightly, to fit what they want? I know they are kind of the leader in combat sports for the most part. They are one of the ones on the forefront of things. But if we have unified rules, then every commission should be the ones following it, not just most of them, and then Nevada plays things fast and loose in their own way. That just seems ridiculous to me. That's the whole point of unified rules. That's it for this episode of Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano. Thank you so much for joining me and looking at everything going on in the world of combat sports. Enjoy this stacked card for UFC 322 over there in MSG. Enjoy the BKFC if you're watching that as well over in California. I'll be checking in on that as well out there in the desert. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Give comments. Let us know what I'm doing, what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve upon. Give us some ratings so that other people can see things and get pushed onto them and they can check it out and be part of the community as well. Make sure to follow us all over the place, all over the internet. X is at Fighting Lines. Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok at Fighting Lines Pod. We put out short clips throughout the week of the show, of the interviews, little bite size of some of my opinions. I give that to you throughout the week, so make sure you're following on those. Even on YouTube, we got a little section of just short clips, just interviews, so you can get your little bites here and there throughout the week. Make sure you are liking those, commenting on those, doing the different things to try to push this deeper into the algorithm so more people get to see it, so more people get to join us and enjoy this show with us. Appreciate you locking in. I'll be back with you next week with an all-new episode where I will recap UFC 322. We'll talk about who is holding those two titles after those fights shake out. And after the dust settles, we'll even see what is up next for the losers of those title fights, as well as what is next for that middleweight division, where there are a lot of fighters in the top 10 mixing it up over these next few weeks. We'll see where we stand after this card. We'll also talk about that BKFC 84 card, recap the action on there, especially that title fight between Hunt and Dyer in that rematch. We'll also preview UFC Fight Night Qatar. Some good fights on that. You know, we've had some real stinker fight nights over there in Vegas. Well, they're putting some good fights on in Qatar, even though it's not a numbered pay-per-view. You got Sarukian versus Hooker. You got Bilal Muhammad versus Ian Machado Gary. You got Uzumir versus Menefield. You got Hermanson and Spivak on the card as well. So some good fights for a fight night overseas. We'll check out that one and get ready for it. We'll also preview that David Benavidez versus Anthony Yarde title fight over there in Saudi Arabia. So a lot of action again in the Middle East for fights next week. We'll talk about all of it next week on Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano.